visit.
And at bbcworldservice.com, the forum with Raj and Data.
Our ability to see the world as clearly as possible has been instrumental in human development. But how much do you regard a pair of glasses as a game-changing innovation? We'll put it all in focus for you.
This is the BBC World Service, the world radio station.
It's midnight GMT. I'm Jamie Robertson.
This is the BBC World Service.
It's late in the afternoon in the Americas, morning in Asia. We're going to bring those time zones and their stories together on business matters over the next hour. We'll be weighing up the chances that COP26 has of achieving some sort of deal on how to limit this seemingly relentless rise in global temperatures. How will it affect business? How will it affect the global economy? And whose voices at the conference are going to be the most important?
Only through having the right pressure from the public on the outside can you actually create the level of political space needed to allow more ambitious policy and political conversations to happen on the inside.
And we're also going to be looking at how the drive to invest in sustainable businesses will not be quite as green as it's painted. That's all on Business Matters here on the BBC. But first, here's the latest news.
Hello, I'm Debbie Russ with the BBC News. Saudi Arabia has recalled its ambassador in Lebanon and given the Lebanese embassy in Riyadh 48 hours to leave the country. It's also extending its ban on Lebanese imports. Tom Bateman reports.
The latest trigger was the emergence of old comments by Lebanon's information minister appearing to label Saudi Arabia as aggressors in the war in Yemen. But the biggest source of Saudi anger is the growing dominance in Lebanon of Hezbollah, the heavily armed Shia movement backed by Iran. Riyadh has always wanted the group's grip diminished. Pulling out ambassadors puts even more pressure on Lebanon. Currently in the midst of such an economic and political crisis, many are wondering how many more blows it can take.
President Biden and his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, have moved towards mending the fractured diplomatic relations between their countries. The US president said Washington had been clumsy in how it handled the announcement of a submarine deal with Australia. He added that France was the oldest ally of the US. For his part, Mr. Macron said they were in the process of rebuilding confidence.
Only what's important is that we do three aspects of joint action in order to strengthen the partnership in Sahel. The clarification between what European defense means and how this is completely compatible with NATO, what European sovereignty means and how it's important for global security.
The United States has called on Sudan's security forces to refrain from using violence against mass protests planned for Saturday. The State Department officials said between 20 and 30 people had been killed since Monday's coup, and about 30 politicians were still in detention. He said Saturday would be a real test for the military. There was a fifth day of protests on Friday. President Macron has said Britain's reputation is at stake in a row over post-Brexit fishing rights. The French Prime Minister, Jean Castex, has asked the European Commission to begin proceedings against Britain that could lead to retaliatory tariffs. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
Mr. Castex urged the Brussels Commission to convene urgently the joint UK-EU Partnership Council set up to settle disputes, and if nothing came from that, then the EU should move towards imposing what he called corrective measures, specifically the imposition of customs duties on certain fish imports. Meanwhile, President Macron has given an interview to the Financial Times, in which he thought that in the rows over fishing and the Northern Ireland Protocol, the UK's international reputation was at stake. When you spend years negotiating a treaty, he said, and then a few months later you do the opposite of what was decided, it is not a big sign of your credibility.
World News from the BBC. The South Pacific Kingdom of Tonga has confirmed its first case of the coronavirus. The infection was detected in a fully vaccinated person in managed isolation who'd returned to Tonga on a repatriation flight from New Zealand. Tonga's Prime Minister warned that residents on the main island of Tongatapu face a possible lockdown next week. Under a third of Tongans are fully vaccinated. The Office of the U.S. Director of National Intelligence has released an updated assessment of the origins of COVID-19, concluding that it was not developed as a biological weapon. But the experts say two plausible hypotheses about its origin remain: natural exposure to an infected animal or a laboratory-associated incident. They say a more definitive explanation would require the cooperation of China. Microsoft has overtaken Apple as the world's most valuable public company. Shares in the tech giant closed at a record high in New York, valuing it at $2.49 trillion, $10 billion more than Apple. Buckingham Palace has announced that Queen Elizabeth will continue to rest for at least the next 2 weeks, following her doctor's advice. However, the palace said the Queen firmly intended to be present for the National Service of Remembrance on November the 14th. Here's Johnny Diamond.
This fortnight essentially gives her a couple of weeks now of not travelling, not meeting people, only carrying out virtual engagements like